In this video, we focus on classroom discussion. So we were thinking about things like group work in your class, you as a teacher initiating discussion with your students. So that's what we are going to talk about. But first, look at what is the purpose of classroom discussion. This is a teaching approach where you want to involve your students in the learning process. So some of the purposes of classroom discussion is to clarify content. So there is some content that you need your students to understand. You are using discussion to clarify that content. Also, you are teaching rational thinking. And also you want to see, do your students have effective judgment? During the discussion, you want to see, can my students apply? Can they analyze? Can they synthesize? Can they evaluate something? So let me check. So discussion will teach your students, or will help to teach your students rational thinking. Also, it increases involvement because the students are actively discussing, so they are more involved in the learning process. As they are doing that, they are acquiring better communication skills, so they can communicate better because they have a chance to talk or to discuss in class. Also, based on the topic that you are discussing, you can increase interest in various subjects. You can increase interest in maybe the history of science. You can increase their interest in things like museums or something like that. Also, it's a good feedback loop for teachers. So from the discussions, you can see the strengths. You can look at your students and say, I think this student needs my help. This one does not need that much help. So this provides room for feedback. Although discussion is a good approach, but it has some limitations. So some of the limitations are sometimes it's time consuming, especially if the discussion is not planned well. If you are not careful as a teacher, you may lose control, especially if you're not well prepared for it. And when dealing with controversial topics, sometimes as a teacher, you may mess up a situation, which means you need to be careful how you handle controversial topics. Now, as a teacher, what is your role in the discussion process? The first thing that you want to do as a teacher is to know your students. Know what the goal of your students is, what is their background, and also think about how your goals intertwine with the goals of your students. Some students have issues from home. You need to feel empathetic as you are initiating group discussions. You need to know that students are going to contribute differently based on uh, issues that are outside class. So as a teacher, you need to know your students, you need to know their background, and you also need to think about their goals. Also, as a teacher, you need to be prepared. Know your topic well. You need to know the topic you are discussing. You need to be able to deal with potential issues. If there are some controversial issues, you need to be ready for them. And think about the possible answers that you are going to give for a controversial subject. You know that this subject we are discussing today may offend some students. You need to have ready answers to deal with those types of students. Also, as a teacher, you are the one who is to begin the discussion. There are several ways a teacher can begin discussions. One of them is just with a question. Ask them a question, and the question will initiate a discussion. Bring a controversial topic, and that controversial topic can begin a discussion. Or something like a common experience. Ask them about maybe a science fiction movie. Ask them about something that a play they have watched and start a discussion based on that. Ask them about a scientific fair that they have attended, and then you start discussion from there. But when starting a discussion, you want to make sure that your students have sufficient information. You need to provide background information about the topic that you want to discuss, especially because you want the students to be involved in the discussion. So as a teacher, you need to facilitate the discussion. So a good facilitator is someone who is patient, someone who listens to what the students are saying, someone who is able to identify the students who are participating and the students who are not participating. The purpose of a discussion is to involve as many students as possible. So usually a patient teacher will be able to do that. Provide silent moments. Things like wait time 1, wait time 2 are important because silent moments make it possible for the students to reflect on a question or on a discussion. In that case, you will see that you have more students answering your questions, more students involved in the discussion. So it is your role as a teacher to ask questions. You need to ask appropriate questions. You need to be able to deal with conflict. You need to have a way. Actually, at the beginning of the semester, think about how am I going to deal with conflict? Because you already know that this semester I am going to have a discussion session with my students. I am going to have discussion sessions with my students. Therefore, I need to have a plan how I deal with conflict. During the discussion, make sure that as much as possible, you are providing summaries periodically. So when the students discuss like for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, summarize the lesson so that your students know what they are getting from the lesson. So the discussions most of the time are going to bring out important information, but still students want the assurance of the teacher that the information is correct. That's why you need to be able to summarize periodically so that the students know that these are the objectives that we were supposed to address. And from this summary, I think we have addressed this objective, and this objective. Normally, you are walking around verifying group consensus as they are discussing. You go to their groups, you ask them, they give you answers. You ask the whole group, what do you think? Do you agree with this answer? Is there anyone who has a different opinion? Why do you have a different opinion from your friends here? So as a teacher, you are walking around in your class asking questions. Also, it is the role of a teacher to reflect on what worked and what did not work during the group discussion. So you can ask yourself questions. Some of the questions are, why did some students not participate? Why were some questions not addressed? Were we not able to address some questions? What were the strengths and weaknesses of this group discussion? What do I do to make the discussion effective next time? So when you reflect as a teacher, you are able to improve upon your role as a teacher in the discussion sessions. What about the students? What is the role of the students? So if you are initiating group discussions, make sure your students are prepared. Give them something to do before class. Give them a reading assignment. Ask them to watch a video. Or give them actually a reading assignment in class itself. Right? Or ask them to watch a video in class so that you prepare them for the discussion activity. Discussions must not come from vacuum. They need to start somewhere, and your students need to have a background. Make sure that you are involving as many students as possible. You want your students to participate in the discussion sessions. As they are participating, you want them to be able to describe what is happening. They need to be able to explain. They need to be able to give reasons. Actually, you want them to be clear when doing the explanations. You want them to explain to each other. You want them to explain something to you. But also teach your students to be able to listen. Students should be able to listen to you as a teacher. Students should be able to listen to each other. So it's not just listening to you. Students should be able to respect each other's views in their groups or in the whole class situation. Now, as a teacher, how do you foster participation in group discussions? Important things in fostering participation is the type of questions that you ask. So you want to ask general or divergent questions. If you are looking for a discussion, you don't want yes or no answers. You want answers that give you an opinion. Questions that can have different answers from different people. So because it's a discussion, if you have a no or yes answer, you just ask a question and then your student says no. That's it. So what? And as you are asking these questions, you need to make sure that you have appropriate eye contact with your students, because if you have good eye contact, the students know that you are interested in that discussion. Actually, you are interested in them. But that eye contact should not be too long so that it may seem threatening to your student. And also, in terms of talking, don't ask just one person like the whole time, only one person answering questions. You need to make sure that you are involving several students, and that one person who is answering questions, he or she needs to know that sometimes the teacher is going to ask other people. That's the whole purpose of group discussion. You don't want one person to dominate the discussion. You want everyone to be involved. So you should be able to monitor how other students in the group are reacting, because you want to involve each and every student. You need to monitor how the questions are. Are they providing negative reactions from your students? Are they providing positive reactions from your students? If your questions are prompting negative reaction, how do you make changes so that you get rid of that negative reaction? So just to add to what we just discussed, you need to control excessive talkers. Excessive talkers can include students and you as a teacher. So as I said earlier on, avoid calling the same student all the time. You do this by asking to hear from someone else who hasn't said anything. So you can say, okay, this is the question, but from this question I want to hear from someone else who has not talked yet. Or just select a student. Your students need to know that anyone can be selected to answer a question. But sometimes you have a student who is just talking and talking, so you need to talk to them outside class. Talk to them respectfully. Right? Don't be demeaning to the student, but the student needs to understand that other students also want to contribute or need to contribute to the discussion. So if the problem is you, if you are talking too much, one way is to videotape yourself and see how excessive your talk is, so that you can see how you are going to address that problem from your end of the bargain. During this discussion, try as much as possible to ask for examples, illustrations, because those provide clarification or those provide more understanding on the part of the teacher and also on the part of the student. So when you ask a question and the student answers it, you can say, tell me more. Can you clarify your answer there? Do you mean this or do you mean that? So that the clarification part improves students' understanding. Allow for pauses and silences. Normally, silence during a discussion allows your students time to think. I'm just going back to the wait time. Wait time 1, wait time 2. Allows students to think. It helps to involve more students in the discussion, and it helps to bring out additional information from what other students have already answered. So allow for pauses and silences. Also, as a teacher, you need to be sensitive to feelings and emotional reactions, especially when you are dealing with topics that may bring negative reactions. Think about think about think about a topic like evolution. Think about a topic like climate change. These are things that may bring some negative reactions. So as a teacher, you are ready for situations like those. Also, you need to make sure that you encourage and recognize students' contribution. Students need to know that they are being noticed. They need to know that you are interested in what they are saying and you can listen to what they are saying. As we said earlier, you want to give them a chance to clarify things. When you do that, they know that, oh, what I'm saying is really important in this class. When a student comments, you need to mention their name, as this one commented, so they know that, oh, the teacher heard our comment and he is or she is using it. But how do you plan a class discussion? So when planning a class discussion, first talk about the purpose. Why are you having that discussion? Usually, sometimes you have uncomfortable students. You need to address this issue. You can talk to them outside sometimes to see if there are other problems apart from just sitting in the class. There may be underlying problems. So, as a teacher, you need to know if there are problems that are preventing them or that are making them uncomfortable to classroom discussion. Sometimes, when you have big group or when you have whole class discussion, some students would not want to participate in the discussion. But if you break them into smaller groups, sometimes give them roles. So in this group, your role will be a secretary. In this group, your role will be a leader. In this group, your role will be someone who is doing this. So you are making sure that as they are doing the group activities, each and every one of those students are involved in the discussion. But also importantly, you need to have ground rules. They need to know what to do, what are the do's or what are the don'ts, because you don't want the group discussion to go astray. You want your group discussion to be in line. You want your group discussion to achieve the objectives that you're looking for. So you need to have rules for the discussion. And also, for your students to be involved, let them know that the group discussion is part of their assessment. They are not just discussing things, you are grading the discussion, you are grading the participation. Devise a way to check the students who are dominating and to check for any controversies that may arise and see how you are going to resolve it. But also, most importantly, teach your students how to listen. They need to know what is needed in a group discussion. When someone is talking, they need to give that person a chance to talk. Then maybe if they want to talk to the whole class, they need to raise a hand, so that as a teacher you select them. So you don't want a classroom discussion to go astray. You don't want it just to be noisy. It should be well directed noise. Also, the way you arrange your class will be important in terms of group discussion. You want to arrange your classroom in a circle or horseshoe so that the students are looking at each other. So this enhances class discussion. And as you are teaching, you want to be as close to your students as possible. So you can be walking around in your class, getting closer to your students. But sometimes when you want to make an important point, you need to be in front of the class. And at other times, if you want to see what your students are doing, you need to be walking around in your class, listening to their discussion, getting involved in the group discussions. So walking around among students during as you are presenting will encourage them to talk to you. If they have a question, because you are close by, they can ask you that question. So as a teacher, you need to plan to do this. Sometimes you can just go and sit at a certain group and talk to your student, and then move on to another group and sit there and talk to your students. So they get used to seeing you close by. Any fear they have for you is minimized, and they can talk to you, they can ask you questions. I mean, that's what you want your students to be able to do. So, just to add on that, an important aspect in group discussion is for you, a teacher, to be able to control and use your class space strategically. So, as we said, the arrangement of the class is important. Moving towards the person, I think I already talked about this one. So, I'll just move. Asking good questions is important, but for you to ask good questions, you need to be prepared. So, prepare a list of questions that can help drive the discussion. Think about what are the good questions. If there are so many questions and some of the questions are bad, you delete the bad questions and just use the questions that you think can spur discussion. As I already indicated, yes or no questions are not important, but you want to ask students like, why do you think, or how do you do this? What is your opinion about this? How did you get this? How can you describe this? So your students can say more as they are listening to the discussion or as they are getting involved in the discussion. Include questions that need them to take a stand. Questions that need them to make a judgment. Questions that have to deal with arguments, pros and cons of something, generating information. Prompt your students to recall information, right? You ask them a question that refer to some readings, something that they read like some time back, or something that you learned some time back, or a question that was on an exam. So as you are discussing, you want to remind them or to find out if they can recall what they did last time. But discussion cannot work well if you don't have time, or if your management of the discussion is not good. So time and discussion management is important in terms of classroom discussion. You need to plan beforehand how much time you are going to take for your discussion. Each section of the discussion, how many minutes are you going to take on that? Because then you are able to time it. At the beginning of the discussion, what questions are you going to ask? At the end of the discussion, what questions are you going to ask? What happens if you run out of time? What happens to the discussion? Will your students continue the discussion the next period? Or will you just give them a homework assignment to complete at home? Or will you just give them something to do online to complete the discussion? So these are the things that you do. These are the things that you plan at the beginning of a discussion. But in general, a classroom discussion is not just a simple thing. It is something that needs to be planned. You are thinking about your groups. How will you plan your groups? Are your students going to have permanent groups? Are you going to be changing the groups? Because as we said at the beginning, discussions deal with communication. they deal with students being able to talk to their peers. So you really need, when you are talking about these groups, you need to plan well. When you are talking about this discussion, you need to plan well so that in the end, the discussion achieves its purpose. Thank you.